I wanted to make a quick video. I actually already made a video, but I didn't publish it. It's not live. I was talking to my friend Jason, Porcupine Jason, about um, type descriptions. He made a video where it got typed. I think it's private, so I'm not going to release, what type he got and all that stuff. I said I wouldn't do that, so I'm not going to do that. But there was one thing I gathered from that video that I thought was interesting, which was the conversation around how well type descriptions fit someone's actual type, and why or why not that type description fits. If you relate to your type description or not, why or why not, basically. I've kind of been under the impression that you're always going to find something about your type description that doesn't fit perfectly. The question is why. And I think the why is pretty common sense. I still think, I've doubted my type and looked at type descriptions and found things that are discordant with what I know of myself. But the point is, you're not going to have a perfect type description that fully encapsulates you as that type, because there are other external factors that go into someone's type that are not considered in the model, and they're not supposed to. And by extension, no model is by default and by definition able to account for all these variables. They're not able to account for these variables because once you open the door to all these variables, then you have to start evaluating what variables have more relevance to the type, or stronger, whatever. Like when you get into the variable, let's say, of intelligence, you could have one SLE that has 140 IQ, likely, and you have another SLE that has 110 IQ. What's the difference between these two SLEs? Well, one is a genius and one is not. Case closed. That's the difference. I don't need to actually evaluate their relative IQ and develop a subtype for socionics that says, if you're a smart SLE, this is what you look like. If you're a stupid SLE, this is what you look like. You don't need to do that because there are certain behaviors and shared values that both of these SLEs share, namely force and structure. You should see this demonstrated, these functions and these IMEs demonstrate themselves observably from their life. You can see examples where they're trying to impose themselves on their environment, and they're using hierarchy and structure in order to expand their influence and consolidate power. That can apply in many different arenas. It can apply, obviously it would apply virtually in every arena, because if their leading function is four-dimensional, then they're going to be interpreting everything through that lens. And that's partially what makes a type imbalanced. This is even true in MBTI nomenclature, whatever. That, for example, an SE base will look at NE in an SE way. What does that look like? Well, my back is against the wall. I need to think of an alternative or a different approach in order to regain control. What does that not look like? It doesn't look like playing with ideas for their own sake, playing with possibilities for their own sake. So you're going to be imposing your leading function basically on all the other functions that you have at some level. And you could argue that your leading function is basically just all the other functions and elements are basically just structural. What do you want to say? They are what they are because the base is what the base is. Because there's so much libido and energy and focus on your leading function, you're not going to be interpreting all your other functions as appropriately. Like you're going to be looking at it through the lens of your base. FI is not simply about understanding interpersonal attraction and repulsion. From an SE basis standpoint, let's say for an SLE, it's about, does this person have control over me or not? I'm not really thinking about whether I'm attracted to them. I'm thinking more about their impact over me and how that relates to my SE. Obviously, that's not a very nuanced understanding of FI, and it's not nuanced because it's not looking at it for what it is. It's looking at it through the lens of it's being reinterpreted by their base function, basically. So I'm not ignoring anybody intentionally. I'm just trying not to die as I drive home. But can you guys hear me? We'd prefer he keep his eyeballs on the road. Yeah, exactly. You guys are praying for my downfall. They're like, hey, bro, I just joined your live. You're not paying attention to me while you drive that vehicle, that metal box, 75 miles an hour. Your priorities are off. Your priorities are off, bro. Now I see you, bro. How's it going? How you doing? How's it going, brother? I see you. You're seen. You're synced. So, um, now again, I'm not above this trap of looking at a type description and saying this doesn't really show in my life. Well, it's also assuming that you have an unbiased view of yourself, which is false. This is where you can appeal to the masses, who also are biased, but they can look at your behavior, people that are close to you, and they can see and read a type description and say, okay, yeah, this one sounds the most like you. We can give examples of how you actually do this, even if you're not aware that you're doing this. So, box of all the different variables that could make you look not the type that you are, then there are so many factors that you have to include that they themselves you can't account for, and you can't really prove. Things like IQ, it's like, okay, well, what is IQ? Is it very firm and reliable metric? Yeah, in a sense, but there's different forms of intelligence. That kind of adds to the pot. You can get into, why not get into brain states and your your all the neurotransmitters in your brain, your relative balance between dopamine and serotonin or whatever. Well, that fluctuates probably pretty constantly, and it's contingent on other factors like your diet, maybe your age, maybe you're up or whatever, your genes. So that's another compounded complexity. And then in theory, with all those variables, um, you could have you could literally have 500 subtypes for one type at least, right? How are you ever able to relate to any one of those subtypes when the subtypes themselves fluctuate constantly? So one day you're a type A SLE, and throughout the day you go between type A and type Z. It just is completely random, um, and therefore you have multiple types of descriptions based upon how you're feeling that day. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's not realistic. So a model is supposed to represent something based upon general universals about the thing in question. It's supposed to be an underlying foundation that models reality. A model is not equivalent to the thing it's modeling. There's not a one-to-one. It's not identical. It's just representative. And by default, and because of that, there are things that the model won't account for. That doesn't mean that there aren't type descriptions that are better than others. There are some type descriptions that are absolute dog water. There's no doubt about that. And it doesn't mean that you can't improve the type descriptions. What it does mean is that models will not be able to account for every single behavioral manifestation of a type. And so by default, there's always going to be some part of the description you're not going to resonate with. But then what changes for an SCE looking through the lens of SC? But valuing FI, I'd say it's not about control anymore. Yeah, I mean, an SEE who has FI creative, because they have higher dimensionality with their FI, they're probably going to see FI a little bit more closer to what FI is about. Obviously, right? They're still going to be interpreting FI based upon um, people they're attracted to, people that they're repulsed by, and they're going to see people as magnets or people who are repulsive, and the repulsiveness is in the person. It's in what they do. It's not about potential. It's not about someone potentially being bad or whatever. Or if you think about an IEE, they're seeing EII, they're seeing how a person's character can develop, what potential exists within the person that's untapped. Gamma SFs, they see what's actual and demonstratable about someone's character, right? So one interprets ethics concretely, you are what you do, whereas the other sees ethics abstractly, you are what you could be, more or less. Um, a Delta NF might say something like, if their circumstances were different, the goodness that's latent within them could be drawn out. But because they don't have those conditions, um, it may or may not come to pass. Gamma SFs are not seeing that potential, largely. They're seeing actions, and those actions correspond to your character. And the result is they will either be attracted to you or repulsed by you because of that. And it takes a lot longer to change the opinion of a Gamma SF about a person. They need to see more evidence of good acts um, rather than bad ones, right? I mean, real quick ask, Porcupine, Jason, did you ultimately decide whether you were SEE or LIE? I watched your vids kind of out of order, so I was curious what your verdict was. Yeah, I'll let him answer that. I told him before I didn't think he was going to send me the video, so I was pretty geeked. I wasn't going to share that with anybody, like what he got in the video. I was going to talk about um, what the model of socionics is supposed to do, how it does it, typing methodology, type description, whether they're good or bad, whatever, that kind of stuff. So obviously he can answer that question, and he raises really good really good questions, and I think there's a lot of value in the things that he says from a socionic standpoint, but also a practical, like, okay, well, this type description says I'm like X and I'm not like X, so where's the discrepancy? And not all type descriptions are the same. Some type descriptions, again, are better than others. Some hit on certain uh, things that others don't. And so I kind of just try to read all of them as if I can, and then aggregate some kind of underlying principle from all of them. Again, I kind of hold to that way of thinking of there are so many variables to a person. Personality is not the entirety of what makes a person a person. That is one aspect of personhood, if you will. And if you absolutize it, then of course you're going to be demanding the type fit 100%. I look at type descriptions or whatever, like, if it describes me 80% of the time, that's probably my type. Of course there's variables. If you have an EIE, I've said this before, from the hood, and you have an EIE from Kansas or somewhere out west, whatever, what's the difference between these two people? I don't know. The fact that one grew up where there's gun shooting all the time and one that grew up where there was gun shooting to defend property, or but the point is they're very different people because they grew up in very different environments. That can be to pull an Occam's razor, that can be the explanation because it's the most simple. These are different people. They're not identical. Now, there should be some shared worldview. That's the key, and shared values. And that should be demonstrated by behavior at some legitimate level. Um, there are some SLEs that aren't as abrasive and aggressive as others. Why would that be the case? Because A, maybe one has more experience in life than the other one does. B, one's smarter than the other one is. Um, um, they could have had an experience that bit them in the ass and they realized this is probably not the way I should live my life, whatever. Right? So like they can still both be SLEs. There's no incompatibility with that. It just means there are other factors that I don't actually have to incorporate into a subtype theory in order to make sense of. I can just say, okay, well tell me your story. What happened? Da 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 da. Boom. Okay, great. This is the difference. But you both see force, you both act on it, you both know how to manage force relations and all that kind of stuff. So that's more the explanation. Um, but yeah, hold on, give me 1 second. I got to park. And again, I'm not totally disagreeing with what Jason was saying at all. I get what he was saying. Um, some type descriptions actually suck. I mean, that's fair. And some type descriptions you can improve on and make better. Do it. That's fine. It's going to take a lot more detail to explain some of those variations within a type, and then you kind of lose you lose something because of that, namely the approachability of the system. Because if you have a 10-page essay that explains robustly all the differences and factors given in a type, then yeah, I mean it's going to be a harder barrier of entry for someone that's new. They're gonna they're gonna have to read 10 pages of a type description. That's fine too. Add that. We have different kinds of type descriptions. We have some that are extremely shallow and short. They serve their purpose to a degree, and we have some that are extremely extensive and drawn out. That's good too. I think we should have all of the options, honestly. Um, and then it's up to the decider to learn about the system, the theory, and to do some homework about themselves. Ask other people, what do you think? Da 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 da. And come to their own conclusion, which I think is great. All of that is beneficial. Um, it's particularly extremely misleading. Neither is typed correctly. Yeah, I mean, tests are very misleading all the time. The idea of being bad at not only because you can't see it, you can see it, process it, but there's a natural inclination towards certain elements, preference. Yeah, there's no doubt. I think there's certain energy allocated for functions in some sense. Like the longer you do a function that you suck at and you hate, the more you're gonna suck at it and hate at it. You hate it probably. You're not really want to do the thing you don't like for long periods of time. You could probably do it intermittently and maybe even learn how to do it better. But by default, because you're not using it and metabolizing that information, then that should affect negatively the way you use it. Um, or it just creates a higher demand of practice that most people are probably not going to do. Um, they're going to use all the other elements and functions to get out of doing that to create a similar product because it's easier, right? If I'm TI polar and I don't really want to get into the rules and the structures of logic, I can just gather a bunch of facts about something and hope that I'm able to understand it that way, and understand how it works from that lens because it's easier for me to approach TE than it is TI, right? And that's really what happens. That's how people use stronger and valued elements in favor of weaker and unvalued ones. That just makes sense. Um, because you have more energy and more care about stronger and valued elements. Um, that's usually kind of how it works. Tests in particular can be extremely, yeah, I read that part. Oops. But yeah, I mean, after watching that video, Jason, yeah, you definitely LSC. I thought for a second, but nah, not after that video. I think gamma and as a quadrant makes a lot more sense. I never really saw any delta themes from it, really ever. I didn't really see any ever. I definitely saw TE, bold value TE, but the question is, how are you using it? What other functions and elements are you using alongside TE that gives me more clarity and understanding of your type? You're definitely using SC in conjunction with TE rather than using any in conjunction with TE. I never really saw in that video really any evidence of any. Not wasn't there. Um, there's some implied evidence of it. There were some themes of being able to adapt to changing circumstances and roll with the punches. That's a very SE based any roll mentality. Um, I see some aspect of open mindedness to a certain degree, um, but yeah, I mean, it's a good video. It's a good conversation. You raise good points. Um, and I think you raise points that hit at the nature of typology. What what are all these systems trying to account for? They're trying to account for personality type, of which personality type itself um, is multi-factored um, with some underlying themes and underlying foundations, and you're just kind of jumping between the two to make sense of things. So that's all I have. I want to keep it short and sweet. Peace.